Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a list of a bunch of different people up on the screen, and I want you to find the common connection between these people. This isn't going to be very hard, I don't think. Here's the first one, Alec Baldwin. Here's the second. I don't know if you remember this person. You remember the name of this guy in the movie? Johnny Lawrence from The Karate Kid. Here's the next one. This is Jack Nicholson from A Few Good Men, one of my favorite movies. I've never seen it. Who's this next one? The principal from... Okay. How about this one? John McEnroe, tennis player from another generation. And then here's the last one. Bobby Knight from Indiana, or then he went to Texas Tech, maybe. These individuals, or the characters that they're playing in the movies, they are all first string on a team known for their anger, right? I mean, John McEnroe, he could throw a tennis racket probably further than he could hit a ball. And Bobby Knight was known for throwing chairs across the court. We could add other people to this list. We could add Bruce Banner, right? The next one, the Hulk. What's his famous line? Yeah, I was thinking that one. That's probably even more famous, but you don't want to see me angry, right? We could also add this guy, whose actual name is Anger from Inside Out. Or we could really put any of the drivers on the I-35 highway, right? We see anger in toddlers when they throw themselves out on the floor and have a tantrum. We've got one in our house. It's really quite comical. We have to try not to laugh because that only makes them more angry. We see it in toddlers. We see it in teenagers who slam doors. We see it in ourselves. And just in case anyone's feeling a little bit smug that maybe this isn't something that they deal with, let me remind you of the last time that you went to the DMV, right? That's painful, isn't it? I heard a story about a guy this week who took a morning off work because he had to run 2 errands. He needed to go to the DMV to switch tags from one car to another car, and then he had to go shop for his nephew's birthday. Well, by the time he got to Toys R Us, it was well after noon because the DMV was the DMV. And so he went and shopped for his nephew and got all the stuff to the counter there, and the lady was checking him out, and she asked him, "So how's your day so far?" And he said, well, I spent the morning at the DMV. And at that time, she was ringing up the last item, and it was an aluminum baseball bat. She said, well, do you want me to wrap this, or are you planning on going back? Anger, it touches all of us. Every person in this room has said something, or thrown something, or kicked something, or slammed something that now looking back, wished we hadn't. The FBI says that there's a violent crime committed every 20 seconds in our country. Not too long ago, there was a men's conference at a large church. There were 300 guys. They were going to go away and have all this teaching. And the leaders of the conference decided that before it started, they were going to sort of poll the audience and say, outside of the main sessions, we're going to have these sort of breakout sessions. What do you guys want to hear about? And so they got all these questionnaires back from these men who were going to go on this conference, and they got 3 main responses. One was they wanted to hear about finances. Give us some insight on budgeting and living within our means and things like that. Second was they really wanted to win at home. Talk to us about being good husbands and good fathers. And the third thing that they wanted to hear about was anger management. These 300 guys. So the conference happens. There's the first sort of main talk, and then they break about 10:30. They have a 15-minute break, and everyone's supposed to go to their breakout sessions. And 250 of the 300 guys went to the anger management breakout session. 250. So maybe this thing called anger is more important to us than we sometimes let on. Now, we're going to talk about anger from the book of Proverbs. Last week, if you were here with us, we talked about how we're going to spend this summer going through this Old Testament book written by Solomon, one of the wisest people to have ever lived. And he writes and he gives insight into all these different facets of life. And so each week we're going to pick a different topic and we're going to sort of camp there and see what insight we can gain. And so today's topic is anger. And just a disclaimer, I'm probably the last person who should be up here talking about anger. I'm not up here because I've got this sort of figured out. As a young child, I had quite a temper. I think my mom thought on many occasions I was going to kill my brother. When I was in middle school one time, I was so angry, I went down to the basement, and on the back side of the basement door, I took a stick or a bat or something, and I put 15 holes in the door. It was on the back side of the door. So my parents never knew. For years. I knew, and I'd go down. That was a monument to my anger. But my parents, they found out years later. As I grew, I sort of matured some and felt like I got the anger thing under control, my temper. And then I got married. And, the temper that I hadn't seen in a decade was back. In marriage, you bring someone so close and so intimate, and you're so vulnerable that, it comes with incredible joys and the potential of intense emotions as well. But the full depth of anger really wasn't seen until kids came on the scene. I'm hoping that's a laughter of acknowledgement. Kids have a way of pushing the right buttons, don't they? And so whether the kids are always talking at the same time, or their standard volume is way too loud, or they just aren't acknowledging anything that you say to them, my blood pressure often starts to boil. And I'm not proud of it, but parenting has brought a new level of sort of short fuse and quick anger in me. So I'm not up here as the expert. I can assure you that. I come to God's Word, hopefully, as we all do, ready to hear, ready to listen, wanting God to speak to me, to speak to us. Solomon has a lot to say about anger. There's over 20 references in Proverbs. We're not going to get to all of them, but the ones that we do hit on, I'd encourage you just to be somewhere in the middle of Proverbs. You'll be able to jump around and get to them with me. Before we get into the actual passages, I thought it was fascinating the word that's used for anger in the book of Proverbs. It comes from the root word that describes someone's face. I thought that was kind of funny. Why would the word face be used for the word anger? And you get into it a little further, you realize it's not just the face, it's really the word for nostrils. It's the word for anger. And so I was like, what happens to our face when we get angry? So I actually Googled it. I Googled angry face, and these were the first 3 results. I think I know why Solomon chose the root word of nostrils and face to talk about angry. Because when we get angry, this is what happens. Our faces turn red, our eyes get tight, our brows get low, our teeth get clenched, and our nostrils flare. That's what happens. And so we're going to talk about anger. And 3 things I really want us to touch on. I want us to talk about anger's dangerous power. I want us to talk about its basic goodness. And then I want to say, well, how can we bring some wisdom to our rage? Okay, these are the 3 things we're going to sort of work through this morning. So the first is anger's dangerous power. Anger is the dynamite of the soul. It has the power to disintegrate things. It has the power to pulverize things. And anger is particularly dangerous in 2 areas. First, Solomon talks about how dangerous our anger can be to our own bodies. Proverbs 14, 29 and 30. He says, one who is quick-tempered displays folly. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy, really the word passion, rots the bones. Now, all kinds of research has been done to show how hazardous anger is to the body. Angry people are ill more, they die sooner, they experience more stress. Being angry is actually much harder on the body than even extreme physical exertion. Nothing sets you up for a heart attack like anger. Anger often leads to headaches, to stomach aches, to sleep problems, and a host of other physical symptoms. But anger, it's not just dangerous to our bodies. That would be bad enough. It's extremely dangerous to our relationships. And that's what Solomon really addresses. Proverbs 29:22 says, an angry person stirs up conflict, and a hot-tempered person commits many sins. Anger makes it impossible to stay connected to other people. It creates conflicts, these sort of tension points, these wounds, offenses. And this is true no matter how you deal with your anger. Most of us probably deal with our anger in one of 2 ways. There are bottlers, and there are spewers. I won't make you raise your hand and say which one you are. You probably immediately can identify yourselves. Bottlers are those who tend to get deeply upset, They have hurts, disappointments, frustrations, but they just bottle them all up rather than getting angry. They have this sort of distorted belief that any feelings of anger are actually bad. So many bottlers were not allowed to express their anger when they were young. And so they've learned this habit, and it's carried all the way into adulthood, this habit of denial of certain feelings and just sort of stuffing it. And most people think it's actually pleasing to God to do that. They think it's effective. If I stuff my bad feelings down deep enough, maybe they'll go away. Their motto is out of sight, out of mind. And while bottlers might not think that their anger is affecting anything, they're dead wrong. You know, the best picture to think of this is sort of the current environmental problem, where experts for years thought, okay, we have all these sort of hazardous toxins. What we'll do is we'll go outside the city and we'll bury them underground. And that'll solve it, right? They're out of sight, out of mind, they're gone. And then years later, people outside of town start getting sick. And they trace all those sicknesses to that contaminated toxins getting into the water supply. Bottled up anger, it always leaks out somewhere. And we might think that these feelings are contained, but they find their way out in irritability, in short tempers, in bad moods, in pouting. If you ask a pouting bottler what's wrong, their answer is going to be nothing. But it's not true. And if that bottled up anger isn't dealt with, there'll be even bigger problems. They'll be withdrawing from relationship, or they'll be manipulating relationships. Anything to not admit that we're upset. Now again, we won't ask for a show of hands, but those of us who are bottlers know how damaging it can be and how hard it is to live with us. The opposite of the bottler is the spewer. And the damage of bottlers is intense. The damage of spewers is just as intense. There's, in the wake, sort of a trail of wreckage behind a spewer. They have no problem letting out their anger. They let it fly quite freely. The best picture for them is a burst dam. The water just explodes out of it. They're not about to let their bottled up anger give them a stomachache or let their blood pressure increase. If they have to slam a door or kick the dog or curse a best friend or even God, they're going to get the steam off. And the writer of Proverbs was well aware of the damage of spewers. Now look at Proverbs 22, 24 and 5. It says, do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. When you hang around with spewers, not only do you tend to get hurt a lot, but you tend to start spewing yourself as well. So that's the first thing we learn from Proverbs, that anger can be incredibly dangerous, both to our bodies and to our relationships. And I thought Frederick Buechner said it really well. He said, of the 7 deadly sins, anger is probably the most fun. To lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll your tongue over the prospect of bitter confrontation still to come, to savor to the last morsel both the pain you are given and the pain you're giving back. In many ways, it's a feast fit for a king. The chief drawback is that what you are wolfing down is yourself. And the skeleton at the feast is you. Anger is incredibly destructive. Whether you're a bottler or a spewer, our anger, whether it's corrosive or explosive, it can be really damaging. The second thing about anger that we see in Proverbs is its basic goodness. Think through this with me. Listen to how Solomon describes the ideal in Proverbs 16:32. He says, better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. Now, the NIV translates that a patient person. But if you're holding one of the more literal translations, the ESV, the NASB, what do you have instead of patient person in Proverbs 16? Well, the answer is on the screen. Like the ESV, instead of patient, it'll say whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and the one who rules his spirit than one who takes a city. Now, being patient and being slow to anger, they are somewhat synonymous. You can see why the translators did that. But for our purposes, we're talking about anger. I think it's actually more helpful to see this one who's slow to anger. Solomon, in describing the ideal, he doesn't say that the ideal is to have no anger. He also doesn't say the ideal is to have this sort of blowing anger. The ideal is not no anger, not blow anger, but it's slow anger. You're not blowing up at people, you're not spewing all the time, you're not stuffing it all the time. No, the ideal is actually slow anger. Now think about that for a second. Think about this statement. It is a sin to never get angry. Really? It's a sin to never get angry? That sounds sort of off, but that's sort of what Solomon's saying. He's saying a wise man or woman will get angry, but they're going to be slow about it. And they're going to be angry at the right things. It is possible to be angry and yet not sin. John Chrysostom, one of the early church fathers, you'll find it fascinating what he says. He says, he that is angry without cause sins. We'd say, yeah. But he who is not angry when there is cause sins. For unreasonable patience is the hotbed of many vices. So the ideal is not no anger, nor is it this blowing anger, but it's slow anger. Now why? Why is that the ideal? Because that's how God is. Remember the time that Moses asked God, said, God, show me your glory. Show me who you are. And so God had Moses go up to the top of a mountain and hit him inside the rocks and said, okay, I'm going to pass by. And as this storm was passing by, God spoke and revealed who he was. And remember what he said? Exodus 34, it said, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. This phrase, slow to anger, it's used a lot in the Old Testament. And every single time, except for the book of Proverbs, it's used to describe who God is, what he's like. Now, if God can get angry, even if he's slow to do it, that means there's some basic goodness to anger, if God can be angry. And since we're created in his image, we were created with this capacity to get angry. Now, to many modern people, this idea of God being a God of anger, even if it's slow anger, we don't like this. You'll hear people say, no, the God I believe in is a God of love and not a God of anger. But here's the deal. If you never get angry, you don't really love anything. Because anger is the natural response when something that we love is threatened. Anger is the natural response when something that we love is threatened. Anger and love are actually very much connected. Listen to what Becky Pippert says. She says it perfectly. She says, think of how we feel when we see someone we love ravaged by unwise actions and relationships. Do we respond with benign tolerance as we might towards strangers? Far from it. Anger isn't the opposite of love. Hate is. And the final form of hate is indifference. The more a father loves his son, the more he's angry at the drunkard, the liar, the traitor in the son. And if I, a flawed, self-centered woman, can feel this much pain and anger over someone's condition, how much more a morally perfect God who made them? See what she's saying? She's saying true love always gets angry. In fact, we can even say it stronger than that anger is really love in motion towards something that is threatening what we love. So if something we really love is being threatened, that's when we get angry. That's why our anger pulverizes and it disintegrates. Because something that we love is being threatened, and so we want to take it out. They're very much related. So each of us could do a little exercise. We could say, okay, I'm going to list out everything that makes me angry. And then you could take each of those and say, what is it that I really love behind each of those? And we could have a list of what we love most. That's why when the Bible repeatedly talks about God being angry, it's because he loves. And he's angry at this cancer of sin that is destroying the people that he loves with his whole being. And if you look at Jesus, who the Bible repeatedly talks about as being perfect, you're going to see him getting angry. You're going to see him getting angry at the money changers in the temple, John 2. You're going to see him getting angry at the religious leaders, Mark 3. You're going to see him getting angry at the death of Lazarus, John 11. And the words that are used to describe Jesus' anger are very intense words. He bellows with anger. He snorts with anger. Why would Jesus Christ get so angry? It's because he's a man of such love. Of perfect love, of pure love. That's why he's getting so angry. He was angry, and yet he didn't sin. Seems like no matter what kind of culture you grew up in, we got it wrong. You grow up in sort of today's individualized culture where any sort of personal affront to any right you have, you should blow up and get angry. Or you grow up in a very strict sort of traditional home where any signs of anger were wrong. You shouldn't show anything. And the Bible sort of paints this middle of the road, like not this blowing anger, not this no anger at all, but this very slow anger. So, let's talk about bringing wisdom into our rage. I think Solomon would tell us a couple things. I think first he would say that we have to admit it. We have to admit that we're angry. That's the first key to having slow anger. To being angry well, to being angry in a way that's wise and smart. Is we have to admit it. We have to be in touch with it. We have to sort of know how angry we really are. What happens to our anger when we don't admit it? When we disguise it, or when we deny it, or when we hide it? Well, really, this is a step of pride, isn't it? You know, we don't want to admit that we're angry because we think that we're above whatever is making us angry, or whoever is making us mad. We're so far above. That person really couldn't be affecting me the way they are. We have sort of a running joke in our house that has to do with a four-letter word. It's the word fine. F-I-N-E. I think I've maybe mentioned this before. Fine never means fine in our house. I'm way too optimistic for me to ever be fine. So if I'm fine, there's a problem. And Jen's way too verbal for her to ever just be fine. So when one of us is fine, we're not fine. We're really angry. But to admit that I'm angry is a step of vulnerability, isn't it? It's an act of weakness. This step of admitting that we're angry is really hard for those of us who are bottlers. Spewers don't usually have a problem admitting they're angry. But if you've been stuffing your whole life, you might not even know you're mad. In those cases, it helps a lot to pay attention to your body. For us to become adept at sort of reading the signs. When there's sort of a stiffening of our posture, or a clenching of our fists, or a setting of our jaws, when we sense this sort of rising frustration, or confusion, or impatience, we sometimes can even hear it in the tone of our voice. Our emotional temperature starts rising. So to deal with our anger, we first have to admit it. And sort of just say, okay, I'm angry. The second thing we have to do is to analyze it. When you and I are angry, the Bible would encourage us to ask a very important question. Why? Why am I so angry? Why does every little thing seem to tick me off? Why does everything feel like a personal affront? Every sort of lack of affirmation, some sort of need or desire that's being blocked. Why does that set me off so much? What's going on? Let's talk about the emotional life for a second. In your car, all of you have little lights on your dashboard, right? You have those little lights. And if you're driving down the road and all of a sudden one of those little lights goes off, nobody starts beating on the dashboard saying, how can I get that light to go off? No, immediately, as soon as one of those little lights goes off, we all start wondering what's going on underneath the hood that's causing that light to go off. That's sort of how our emotions play out in our lives. And Solomon's encouragement to us is that when we're angry is to stop and say, why am I so angry? What has prompted this anger? What is this telling me about myself and about what's going on underneath the hood? Let me show you where Solomon's father, David, what he says about this. Psalm 4:4. He says, be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. So you come to a situation and someone's taken advantage of you, or you're in a situation that hasn't gone the way you planned it, or you got the raw end of the deal or something like that. And your first response is to be livid, but David says, no, slow down. And in those quiet moments, I think that's the significance of beds there, a place where there's no distractions, stop and just go deep with that for a second. It's going to take some analyzing and some dissecting to figure out, but usually it's not hard to figure out what's making us angry. What's harder is to figure out what's behind that, what's underneath that situation. And this is where I think we need to flip the question on its head. Remember, we talked about anger and love are connected. So the question to ask at that moment is, what am I defending with my anger? What is it that I love that it feels like that's being threatened in this situation? And that's why I'm getting so revved up about it. Let me just give a few hypothetical situations. How about one? I get angry when I hear that single moms who take their cars to the mechanics get charged more than others for the same repairs. Or two, I get angry at a child who doesn't listen to what I ask them to do. Or three, I get angry when I'm late for a meeting. Or I get angry when I'm stuck in traffic. Let's just take those hypothetical situations. Never really happened to anybody. No, so take a situation where we get angry and we see a single mom taken advantage of. What love is being threatened? It's actually a very noble love, right? It's the love of fairness and equality. And the fact that that's being violated. This is a very righteous anger coming up when you see someone being taken advantage of. That kindles a very righteous anger. How about the child who won't listen to what you tell them to do? Well, what love is being threatened in that moment? Well, it could be a lot of things. It could be the love of control. It could be the love of power. It could be the love of your own reputation. Maybe you're in a public space and your kid's not listening to you and other people are watching. It could be a good love of wanting to help your child mature in the right way. What about when you're angry because you're late for a meeting? Probably it's the love that you want to sort of protect your own reputation and you don't want to have to admit to someone, hey, I just didn't budget my time well. I tried to squeeze too much in. So it's sort of this love of our own egos that is what's making us angry. What about those who get angry because they're stuck in traffic? This is sort of a circumstantial anger. It has nothing to do with injustice in the world. It's about impersonal, unavoidable circumstances that infringe on our comfort or our convenience, our agendas, our schedules. They make us angry. But what love is being threatened? Most of the time, it's the love of self. You know, especially in our culture, we kind of hear the message over and over again that the self is most important. And that we are the center of our own lives. The problem is, we're not the center of everyone else's life. And so when that infringes upon our deep love of ourself, we get angry. So if we stop for a moment and we ask, what that I love is being threatened, I think a lot of times we're going to realize that our loves are out of whack. And David's encouragement is when we notice that we're angry, when the lights on the dashboard of our life are sort of flashing at us, is to pause, to climb into some sort of quiet place and to search our God, to search our hearts, to ask God, what's going on at the deeper level? Why am I angry? And again, this might be hard to sort out. It may mean that you need to talk through it with a friend or with a counselor. Sometimes it's hard to figure out the deeper level things. But this is a crucial step. Usually we get so reactionary in our anger. We get angry and then boom, we respond. If there's this pause step in here, we need this step of analysis. Solomon would say it this way, Proverbs 29. It says, a fool lets fly with all his temper, but a wise person keeps it back. A wise person won't just fly off the handle. They'll still get angry, but they're going to be slow to get angry. They're going to keep it back. They're not going to stuff it. They're not going to bottle it up. They're going to learn from it. They're going to use anger as this opportunity to grow. So after admitting our anger and then taking this step to analyze it, the last thing I think we could say is that there often needs to be some reordering of our loves. It was St. Augustine who said that the biggest problem we have in life is disordered loves. That disordered loves means that there's many things that are good. There's our jobs, there's our families, there's our kids, our relationships, our egos. They're good things. But we turn them into ultimate things. We don't just love those certain things, but we look to those things to give us happiness and to give us satisfaction and to give us security and self-worth. Things that only God can give us. And so when we turn these good things into ultimate things, when we love them too much, more than God, that's when our emotions get out of whack. They get distorted. And that's what's happening when we get angry a lot of the times. Something good has become an ultimate thing, and I have to have it. And if I can't have it, I'm going to clobber someone to get it. Our love's gotten sort of disordered. And so by admitting our anger and pausing to analyze it, we can often see that, wow, it's my love of control. It's my love of cleanliness. It's my love of power. It's my love of security that I'm looking for. Something new. And the only one who can handle the weight of our happiness and our security and our self-worth is God. And so in this moment, we need to stop and say, God, I admit I really look to that a lot. But that can't. Anger really can serve us. It can serve us because it can show us that our identities have sort of moved off center. And in a step of confession and in a step of repentance, we can say, God, reorder my lives. Put yourself back in the spot where only you should occupy in my heart. God is the one who needs to be in that ultimate spot. And he's the one who deserves that spot because of what he's done in Christ. The way he's pursued us and come after us. The way he's absorbed all of our anger in himself on the cross. God can handle our anger. He's the only one who can. So we go to him and we ask him to reorient. I'm going to pray for us. Afterwards, we're going to sing a song that, for me, for many years, has been a reorienting song. It's the song, It Is Well. You know the old hymn. We often think of this song when we're going through something really hard, some sort of tragedy. But I think this is a great song in the midst of anger. When something has gotten under our skin, when we see our loves disoriented, to go back to God and say, you are big enough to handle this. I need you to help reorient me. To show me again how big you are, how sovereign you are. And for me to just say, you know what? It's okay. It's okay. I can be slow to anger because I return my trust in you. So let me pray for us and we'll end by singing this great hymn. Lord, I thank you that your word speaks to such practical things in life like the emotion of anger. That we probably already felt this morning and we're sure to feel sometime later today. Lord, I thank you for the realization of the truth that our anger and love are connected. And so, Father, would you help us to pause more frequently and to ask, what are we loving in this moment? And Lord, every time that brings conviction, would we run to you? Lord, that may lead to really good things that we love, and that may lead us to action, to stand up for injustice, to help someone in need. Lord, we want to be wise in the way we handle this emotion. And as we follow your Son, Jesus, he can lead us to that wise path where we don't stuff our anger, where we don't just blow our anger, but we become very slow to anger the way he was. Jesus, you're our Savior, you're our guide, you're our teacher. Thank you for rescuing us from our own sin and for showing us how to live. We pray this